move you make, every step you take, surveillance cameras are watching. Hello, Judge. I am the first speaker arguing on the proposition side on the motion that this House regrets the worldwide proliferation of surveillance cameras. I'd like to start by stating my definitions and then my contentions. We define this House as the UN. We define regrets as the UN believes that the proliferation of surveillance cameras has done more harm than good. We define worldwide as globally. We define proliferation as the rapid increase in numbers or amount, and we define surveillance cameras as a video camera that is placed in the public domain to observe. Now I will state our contentions. Our first contention is that the use of surveillance cameras in public areas is an invasion of people's rights to privacy. Our second contention is that the proliferation of such new technology creates a dangerous potential for misuse. And our third contention is that surveillance cameras have done little to achieve their intended goal of ensuring public safety. Now I will expand on our first contention. Wherever you go, there are surveillance cameras, not just in big cities and obvious places like Times Square or outside the White House. According to The Guardian, over 122 million Americans have their face prints in a government database without consent, despite the fact that over 163 million Americans disapprove of surveillance cameras. Furthermore, surveillance cameras raise numerous grave threats to civil liberties. Video surveillance systems are proliferating, despite the fact that they infringe on the freedom of speech guaranteed by the First Amendment and threaten the anonymity and privacy protected by not only the Fourth Amendment, but also state constitutions. An example of this is when, according to Fast Company, potential protesters know that every action they take is recorded. Yes?
Wasn't it true that the Constitution isn't applicable in the UN, so therefore it wouldn't be a civil liberty violation?
No, because the U.S. is still part of the UN, and this is a right that we should all have. We need our privacy, and that's why surveillance camera is such a big problem. And protesting is a right that many of the countries that are part of the UN have, which is why this is such a big problem, because when potential protesters know that every action they take is being recorded, they become fearful of losing a job, a scholarship, or even their immigration status, causing many of them to feel forced to stay silent at the very moment their voices are needed most. Which leads me to my second contention. The proliferation of such new technology creates a dangerous potential for misuse. For example, according to EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation learned that more than 100 ALPR cameras were exposed online, which were often accessible by anyone with a browser. Additionally, the management at Boston Sheraton Hotel was recording workers as they changed clothes in a locker room. Examples like this happen a lot because there are barely any restrictions on monitoring the activities of others with the use of a surveillance camera. Furthermore, law enforcement, who is supposed to enforce these regulations, are also misusing surveillance cameras. For example, a database in Michigan law enforcement was used by officers to help themselves or their friends threaten motorists after traffic altercations, stalk women, and track estranged spouses. Additionally, according to CNBC, currently police officers are using surveillance cameras to track and target protesters. This has happened numerous times before. For example, in 2018, the FBI came under fire for keeping records on peaceful activists with surveillance cameras. Additionally, according to ACLU, the FBI, as well as many individual police departments around the nation, conducted illegal operations to spy upon, harass, and even arrest political activists who are challenging systemic racism. The fact of the matter is, being tracked has been a tool used by the government for years, preventing people from fighting against oppression. We have already seen this happen numerous times in the past, like with the Gilded Age Titans, which leads to my third contention. Surveillance cameras have done little to achieve their intended goal of ensuring public safety. According to multiple studies, not only did cameras fail to decrease the actual rate of crime, but they also failed to reduce the fear of crime. Additionally, Police Chief Jim Pershong states that surveillance cameras hadn't helped investigators identify new suspects or bolster evidence against current ones. Furthermore, according to Lincoln Police statistics, there were 128 assaults within 500 feet of the cameras last year. Similar assessments were conducted in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Washington, and all reached the same conclusion that surveillance cameras are unnecessary. Moreover, according to The Conversation, facial recognition on surveillance cameras had a 2% success rate, which has caused innocent people to get arrested. It therefore has the potential to increase tension between ethnic minorities and the police. This has already happened before. According to The Conversation, extensive research has shown that surveillance cameras have exacerbated abuse in policing and racial bias. To further prove this, Charlene Prempeh, who is part of a campaign group that considers the impact of technological developments, explained how surveillance cameras are disproportionately targeting people of color. As you can see, Judge, this House regrets this decision because surveillance cameras cause more harm than good. As proven time and time again, surveillance cameras will inevitably be misused, which has only aggravated racial bias, infringed on our amendments, and failed to keep us safe. Thank you, and I urge the judge to vote for the proposition side of this argument.
Government's first duty and highest obligation is public safety. Arnold Schwarzenegger, former governor of California. Good morning, judges and observers. Today, I will be presenting the first opposition speech. First, I'd like to present my 3 contentions, and then I'd like to go on to refute my opponents. My first contention is that surveillance cameras deter crimes from occurring. Our second contention is that surveillance cameras are a tool in helping solve crimes. And lastly, our third contention is that surveillance cameras save lives and money. Our first contention is that surveillance cameras deter crimes from occurring. By having surveillance cameras monitoring public places, criminals are more exposed and less likely to commit a crime. For example, an Urban Institute study found that 4 months after security cameras were installed in downtown Baltimore, incidents of crime dropped by an average of 30 a month and continued to drop for the rest of the time frame analyzed by the study, which spanned over 3 years. This proves that cameras in the public domain really do prevent crime. And furthermore, they help keep people safe in places that can be more dangerous. Our second contention is that surveillance cameras are a tool in helping solve crime. Yes.
How is it fair to infringe on all the citizens' right to privacy just to catch the 1% that are criminals, especially because these cameras haven't even been successful in catching them?
I will address the privacy point when I get to your contentions. However, I'll even address that cameras do catch people and the contention I'm presenting now. Okay, my second contention is that surveillance cameras are a tool in helping solve crime. Easier identification brings quicker justice to the victims because witnesses are very unreliable. Traumatic events can affect witnesses' memories, causing confusion in court cases. Security cameras take away fear and bias from a proper testimony that keeps people safe. They are the only reasonable alternative. For example, Grant Frederick, who teaches at the FBI National Academy, said that video holds more evidence than any other source, more than DNA, crime scene analysis, or eyewitness testimony. Christopher Sean Harris, a man who was unjustly slammed into a wall by a police officer, was able to get justice because the cameras caught this person, showing that security cameras actually do help solve crimes and bring justice to victims. This brings faster and fairer cases for grieving and hurt people. And lastly, our third contention is that surveillance cameras save lives and money. By having surveillance cameras, money is saved through less crimes, less court meetings, and quick alerts to crime scenes. For example, under a system used by the Urban Institute, under a study done by the Urban Institute, murder costs $1.4 million, robbery costs $120,000, or aggravated assault costs $89,000, and rape $62,000. When surveillance cameras prevent these crimes or make the solving much faster, this money is saved, which proves that they save money and they save lives. Now I'd like to respond to Prop's contentions. Their first contention is that surveillance cameras are extremely detrimental to privacy. Furthermore, this is negated by the fact that today in today's society, when we have sites like Google or Facebook, our privacy is already compromised. Surveillance cameras, however, use this slight invasion of privacy to actually help people. Sites like Google and Facebook don't. Furthermore, this is part of the social contract, an unspoken agreement that you give up a small part of your privacy for the protection of society. And because of this, we actually have the privacy is something that we are willing to give up. Yes.
Considering that 123 million Americans disapprove of surveillance cameras, would you still agree that they're willing to give up their personal freedom just for some criminals to get caught?
Well, it's true that they have to give up their freedom of privacy, and it might not be something they might like. The facts stand untouched. They actually help solve crimes, and they actually prevent them. If we have this, then we should be able to give up privacy, something that's more of a construct, in order to be safe. And it's part of the social contract, as I mentioned before. The second contention is that this can lead to abuse. However, what these people are doing is illegal. And if they're doing something creepy behind the camera, then they should be put behind bars. And this isn't a problem with the proliferation of cameras. In modern society, there's constant change in policies and regulations to prevent this. We shouldn't give up a good thing simply because there's a slight potential for abuse. And lastly, their third contention is that this has done little to achieve the intended goal, and that there's been assaults right in front of cameras. And yet we've proven that there are ways that they solve the crimes, and in the end, we are willing to give the slight privacy in order to have a safer society. For these reasons, I am proud to oppose. Thank you.
But of surveillance. Michael. Good morning, Judge. I'm the second speaker representing the proposition side of this debate. First, I will refute against my opponent's contentions, and then I will elaborate on my own contentions. Now I will refute against my opponent's contentions. I would like to point out how all of my opponent's contentions are strikingly similar, implying the same point that surveillance is a tool that solves crimes and saves lives. Opposition's only evidence to support this was a statistic in which many factors can go into deteriorating crimes, such as stricter laws imposed or who's in charge of a specific city, and its support assumption it was because of a simple camera. I would like to magnify the fact that proposition's entire argument overweighs opposition because we have a more variety of evidence and perspective due to the fact we have more diverse contentions. And furthermore, I will continue to refute their contentions. Opposition's first contention was that surveillance deters crimes, which is also similar to their second contention that surveillance is a tool to prevent crime, so I'll refute it at the same time. How can surveillance be used as a tool to deter crime or save lives when deepfake is a threat that comes along with the advancement of surveillance that have increased danger rather than deteriorate crime? The Forbes estimates that deepfake presents a unique opportunity for visually flawless editing of surveillance footage. The grainy, blurry, optical, unusual, and heavily compressed nature of surveillance makes it uniquely vulnerable to manipulation.
POI.
This causes evidence found by surveillance not admissible in court, therefore ruining the sole purpose and demolishing the first speaker's point because the only true trustworthy person in a court is a witness, demolishing all of opposition's contentions. This example also refutes opposition's third economical contention because seeing how easily surveillance can be hacked makes it a threat to cybersecurity, and according to a business dedicated to technology, the United States cybersecurity budget was $14.98 billion, rising 14% from the previous year. I think we can all agree there's an additional price tag to surveillance that opposition ignores and has provided barely any evidence for. Now we'll move on to my first contention, which is that surveillance cameras in public areas is an invasion of people's right to privacy. An example of this is how surveillance has been implemented in China. With over 200 million of these cameras, officers are able to identify an average citizen's entire criminal history in less than a minute. With each person they catch, they plaster their faces on monstrous billboards for the purpose of humiliation. Not only is this a massive invasion of privacy, but also demeans a person for crimes not paying your taxes. This example portrayed as a warning for the United States and the world. With the rapid development of surveillance happening in China, we can very much end up like China because of spatial development developed in San Diego, which has also been used in multiple police departments while also receiving backlash from angry citizens. Furthermore, according to the Fourth Amendment, Article 3, Section 2, every citizen is protected from unreasonable searches, and there have been an outstanding number of court cases, such as Jewell versus NSA, that have exposed the unconstitutionality of surveillance and how it's an immense violation of privacy. If we go on opposition's path, we won't be too far from China's reality. Consequently, this leads to my second contention that the proliferation of such new technology creates a dangerous potential for misuse. Not only does surveillance strip a civilian of their right to personal freedom, but it's also been used to target specific citizens based on race. Take, for example, the lawsuit Hassan versus City of New York in 2012, according to the Center for Constitutional Rights. This was a federal lawsuit against the City of New York that challenged the New York Police Department's surveillance of Muslim communities after being exposed of a secretive human mapping and surveillance program established after 9/11 in New York, New Jersey, and beyond. It's a sad reality of how such an advancement of technology the opposition claims should protect people is constantly being grossly misused. Surveillance cannot be used without a human, making it vulnerable and giving an excessive amount of powers to law enforcement. Opposition has claimed we can enforce stricter laws to prevent this misuse. However, the harm has already been done, and this is a regrets debate. Offering weak solutions have done nothing in the past and will do nothing in the future. And all these examples that I and my first speaker have provided, no one put regulations on cameras, proving how it's continuously being misused. This leads to our final contention that surveillance cameras have done little to achieve their intended goal of ensuring public safety. Suicide attackers aren't deteriorated by video cameras and are even more attracted to the television coverage cameras can ensure. By terrorizing people in front of surveillance will only draw a massive amount of attention to them, therefore creating a threatening environment. Nevertheless, a 2005 study from the British Home Office found that cameras did not cut crime or the fear of crime. An additional 2 studies conducted in the United States by the Athena Research Corporation exposed that robbers said cameras and videos aren't effective and don't keep them from robbing. Logically speaking, we know this is true because people rob and kill in front of cameras all the time, and one of the reasons they give is no one is watching at the specific time, and they're also not worried about being recognized because they could just wear a disguise and get away. Judge, opposition is creating a world where future generations won't be able to define the word privacy. Being watched under surveillance 24/7 has become our new treacherous reality that opposition is advocating for. Opposition lacks an answer as to how misuse of surveillance will be prevented and is under the misconception that surveillance is the only device in the world that will keep us secure, when in reality advancing technology we barely even understand now is what society fears most and has been proven to be unlawful. Proposition has provided an overwhelming amount of evidence disclosing how surveillance is the true criminal in this world. Thank you, and I compel the judges to vote for the proposition side of this debate.
Hello, Judge. I am the second opposition speaker, and today I will start off by going over our own contentions and rebuilding them, and then going on to refuting my opponent's contentions. So our first contention on side opposition is that security cameras deter crimes. And so to this side proposition responded with a few things. First, to which they said that all our contentions are the same because they all center around the fact that security cameras save lives. And this is pretty untrue. So our first contention is talking about how this deters crime from occurring in the first place. So yes, that saves lives, but that also saves crime. That saves crime from occurring. And we have many different pieces of evidence to that, to which side proposition simply responded by saying that the only true person in this case is a witness because security cameras can be manipulated. However, witnesses can have lots of emotional trauma if they witness really bad crimes or even just a crime in general. And there's also something called snitch culture, which is that the perpetrator, the one who committed the crime, tells the witness that you cannot say what actually happened, or I will hurt you, or something will happen to you. So these things so eyewitnesses are extremely unreliable in many different cases, whereas security cameras do deter crime by quite a lot. So we see that based on a study conducted by the Electronic Security Association, about 83% of burglars would first determine whether a home has security cameras before they broke into the house. 60% of them would typically avoid homes with security cameras. No, thank you. So clearly, security cameras are doing their job, and they are deterring crime because that means that people do not want to enter a home or enter a business that has security cameras because they have a higher chance of getting caught. To talk about hacking, right, and how they can simply hack into the security cameras, it is extremely difficult to hack into a security camera. It's not something that your casual run-of-the-mill criminal is able to do. You need a lot of high-tech materials. You need a lot of high-tech gear. No, thank you. So it is much harder than side proposition is leading you to believe. Going on to our second contention, which is that surveillance cameras are a tool in solving crimes. So once these crimes already occur, surveillance cameras do help solve them. Side proposition wants you to believe, Judge, that security cameras do nothing at all, in which they actually, in a study done by Nottingham University, they looked at 111,000 cases, and in that, 65% of them were solved with the help of security cameras. So clearly, surveillance cameras are doing something right, and they're definitely helpful. Yes.
Do you have a source for that study?
Yes. It was by Nottingham University. So it was in a Nottingham University report, which is a university in England. And then on to our third contention, which is that surveillance cameras save lives and money. So this is different from our other two contentions because we're talking about how security cameras save money because they, first of all, cause less crimes to be committed, and then they cause quicker court meetings, right? So that's less time for the individuals who are actually in it, and therefore they're saving money overall. To which they respond by saying that the budget for cybersecurity is actually being harmed because surveillance cameras can be hacked into, to which I already responded by saying that this is extremely difficult, and it's not something your average criminal can do. All right, going on to refuting their three contentions. So their first contention is about privacy, right? To which they gave two pieces of rebuilding, which first of all, which is China and how they are misusing this. So again, this is the issue of the Chinese government. We don't see this happening with any other free world country. No, thank you. With any other government happening. So clearly this is China's problem and China's abuse, and therefore they need to follow international law and other regulations. And it is not the worldwide proliferation of the security cameras that is causing this issue. They also respond by saying that we have privacy in our amendments, and while that's true in the United States, not every country in the world has amendments. And yes, they do still deserve privacy, even if you don't have an amendment that says you deserve privacy. However, the privacy that side proposition is creating a world in which your privacy is completely violated every single place you go. But that's simply untrue because security cameras aren't in homes unless you willingly install them. No, thank you. And if you willingly install them, then that means that you are willingly giving up your privacy in your home. And if they're not in your home and they're in public, well, people see you in public anyway. So you don't have privacy in public, and these cameras are capturing the same thing anybody walking down the street sees, and therefore it's not violating privacy as much as side proposition wants to lead you to believe, Judge. And then for the misuse point, they talked about how they will be misused, and it has happened in the past, and so we regret that has happened. And yes, side opposition agrees. We regret people misuse the cameras, but we don't regret that the cameras are there in the first place, simply because of all of the positive things that they've done. And their last contention is that they do little to actually get to the goal, to which I've already provided the evidence that they do help solve crimes with the 65%, and they do help. And we know that on side opposition that surveillance cameras aren't the only device, but they are extremely helpful. Therefore, I am very proud to oppose.
At the end of the day, the goals are simple: safety and security. Jody Brown. Good afternoon, Judge, and today I'm the rebuttal speaker for side opposition. So first I'm going to be going through some loose ends in this debate. First being the idea that a witness is a trustworthy source to solve crimes. Well, yes, if there is no surveillance camera, a witness may be helpful in solving crimes because yes, they were there. But at the end of the day, witnesses are subjective and often change the truth to some extent because they aren't necessarily fully focusing on the crime, and also they might have gone through some trauma which causes them to change it. However, surveillance cameras are always going to be objective And that's objective evidence. So that's going to result in quicker court meetings because objective evidence can't be denied. The first loose end, which I'm going to talk to again later on in a clash, is how much privacy we are actually giving up. Side proposition is exaggerating the amount of privacy we are giving up because already in privacy, in a public setting, people are watching you. So having surveillance cameras searching for criminals does not infringe on your privacy because let's be honest, surveillance cameras are not going to be paying a whole lot of attention to me walking down the street to go get a sandwich. No, what they're going to be looking for is criminals, and that's their job, to look for criminals, not to look at the everyday person going and getting a sandwich. So now moving on to the three main clashes of this debate. The first one being that surveillance cameras may not be necessary. Well, and that they don't do a good job. Well, first of all, my colleagues have presented multiple pieces of evidence to prove that surveillance cameras have solved and prevented so many crimes worldwide and have saved so many people's lives. As my colleague said in her last speech, that 65% of crimes surveillance cameras helped solve and did solve. And without these cameras, the community would be less protected and money would be lost because 65% of those crimes wouldn't be solved. And also, a lot of the evidence the side proposition might say is actually inaccurate because if we look at what the numerator and denominator for the crimes that weren't committed due to the very existence of those cameras would be, it can't be measured. But overall, surveillance cameras have had a huge effect on crimes and on bad behavior. The second clash is that side proposition believes that cameras limit privacy in this privacy versus security clash. Well, first of all, several of the privacy abuse examples that they brought up in their first and second speeches are violations of international law, where the international community must step up and act upon. And one example that they didn't bring up is China's surveillance, and while we don't agree with China's surveillance, that's a prime example where the international laws are enforced and should be enforced because that's where surveillance privacy is invading privacy. But ultimately, what we are saying is that that's far different from saying that legally permitted surveillance should simply not exist because it infringes privacy, which it does not. In addition, in society, there are different expectations of privacy when you're in public versus when you're in house, which is considered your social contract, which is an unofficial agreement shared by everyone in a society, where they give up some freedom for security. And that is why we can put surveillance cameras out because of your social contract. So now moving on to our third clash, which is surveillance cameras' possibility of being abused. Well, first of all, everything has the potential for abuse, but what we do in modern society is mitigate those issues with policies and regulations to protect people's basic human rights. That judges how we prevent these potentials for abuse. Are we ever going to get to zero? No, but the positives of surveillance outweigh those potential harms. So also, in their first speech specifically, they brought up the idea that surveillance cameras are racist. But as we've seen with the Black Lives Movement and many other movements throughout history, that's not the case because these minorities, if they have something to say, they go out and they will say it and they will be heard. And they fail to give any evidence that there's a direct relationship between surveillance cameras and minorities, where if surveillance cameras are out there, minorities won't go and speak their mind. That is just simply not the case. In fact, if they're trying to harm minorities, if there's people trying to harm minorities, surveillance cameras will catch them and put them in jail. So now moving on to comparing the two worlds. In Cops' world, they seem to regret on things with value that have done so much good because they're intimidated by the possibility of making mistakes. And they also are letting criminals more so run free. But in an odd future world, we embrace those mistakes and fix them. We put policies into place and fix it. Thank you.
Thomas, a former Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court, once said, "We are rapidly entering the age of no privacy, where everyone is open to surveillance at all times." Hello, Judge. I'm the third speaker representing the proposition side of this debate. First, I'll point out any fallacies in my opponent's argument. Next, I'll clash. Finally, I'll criticize the debate and weigh the world. If time allows, I'll explain my proposition should win. Now, I'll point out any fallacies. My opponents brought up multiple times, my opponent's only defense to our point that there will be abuse is by saying that there will be more regulations, but they never stated how they would go about this. With the proliferation of surveillance cameras, there are so many of them, how can we possibly keep track of every single camera in the public? Who will enforce these rules? Do you expect the police to turn in their fellow co-workers? Clearly, my opponents haven't thought this through. With the proliferation of cameras, there will be even more misuse because there are more cameras and less control over how they would be used. My opponents also brought up that people are already in public, but there's a huge difference between being in public and being constantly watched, identified, and suspected by the government using cameras. My opponents also brought up the point about protests, but the government uses surveillance cameras as a weapon against protesters to identify them and silence their voices. It is a tool to catch protesters expressing their right to freedom of speech, and my team has provided an abundance of evidence to prove so. Now I'll go on to clash. My opponent's first contention is that it deters crime, but this clashes with our first contention that it is a violation of privacy. My opponents have said it themselves. They're willing to sacrifice the public's comfortability and privacy for cameras that don't even work. We have to look at the magnitude. These cameras are in the name of catching the 1% that are criminals. But in this process, they are infringing on the entire nation, the entire population, and the entire community's right to privacy. This is unfair for law-abiding citizens and proves that cameras don't make people feel safer. Now I'll go on to my opponent's second contention is that it'll help solve crime. This clashes with our third contention that surveillance cameras are unsuccessful. Cameras don't actually solve the problem of crime. This can be proved with the variety of undeniable evidence that my team has provided. My opponents are so eager to fix the problem of crime that they're willing to use cameras that aren't even successful in half the cases. For a technology that will hold the lives of civilians, innocent civilians, in its hands, we should work harder and refuse to settle for a meek solution. Now, my opponent's third contention is that it'll save lives and money, but this clashes with our second contention that cameras are being misused. The proliferation of surveillance cameras is like opening Pandora's box. There might have been a few cases where surveillance cameras were helpful, but the amount of negative impact is overbearing and overwhelming. My opponents have proved time and time again that these cameras hurt civilians more than it helps them. Proposition's viewpoint is realistic and accurate, while opposition is being narrow-minded and naive. Now I'll go on to explain what this debate is really about. This debate boils down to whether or not we are willing to contribute to the trend of technology taking away personal liberties. Technology is advancing faster than we are able to adapt. Instead of understanding the new technology we are allowing into our lives, we have developed a detrimental habit of just assuming that such technology is in our best interest. Does anyone really read the terms of service when they download an update? We need to wake up. We have to be very cautious and make sure that the aforementioned technology doesn't disregard our ethical standards. My opponents claim that these cameras are in the name of surveillance and safety, without acknowledging the undercurrent of corruption. These surveillance cameras are part of a bigger trend that's slowly corroding the American ideology of liberty and freedom. Now I'll weigh the world. My opponents are defending the state of surveillance they created with the proliferation of surveillance cameras. Every day, the government enforces and encroaches on your right to privacy. With the help of surveillance cameras, authorities have collected and stored private information specifically on citizens with an ethnic background. In other cases, authorities have stalked women using these cameras. This has all happened, and hackers are preying off a weak surveillance system to expose private footage online. This has all happened because of the government's inability to enforce regulations and protocols. Law-abiding citizens will be forced to continue to live in a constant state of fear and anxiety because of the sacrifices opposition has made. And they haven't even had success in catching criminals. One look at the homicide rate, which is a 91% solve rate in the U.S. before the proliferation of surveillance cameras, has fallen to a 61.6 solve rate in 2019, according to The Atlantic. This proves that these tech revelations aren't helping, but it doesn't have to stay this way. In Proposition's world, we acknowledge the devastating mistakes made in the widespread use of surveillance cameras. We pledge to protect civilians' individual rights and guarantee them the ability to feel comfortable in this nation. By doing this, we will create a bond of trust between law enforcement and the citizens that opposition lacks. Let us not, out of fear of crime, destroy the very thing Americans and the world is most proud of. The ability to feel comfortable publicly expressing disapproval against the government is important now more than ever, given the recent protests. Let's put an end to the proliferation of surveillance cameras. And we have refuted all of my opponent's contentions, and on the stand, I'm victorious in the point of clash, and our argument is simply stronger than my opponent. Therefore, we have won this debate. Thank you.